Chapter 37 Winnie's Wedding Part 1 The engagement was announced in the papers, a new-fangled notion which met with Judy's disapproval. There do be many a slip twixt the cup and the lip, she muttered. Sure, and we'd be in the pretty scrape if anything but good happened, Frank, in the next 3 weeks. There was Maggie Nicholson now. Her beau did be going clean out of his head awake before the day itself, and it's in the asylum he's been ever since. Wouldn't them Binnies have the laugh on us if the wedding didn't come off after all? Only 3 weeks to the wedding day, Winnie's wedding day, when she would leave Silverbush forever. There were moments when Pat felt she couldn't endure it. When Vernon Gardiner said jokingly to Winnie, "Next time we'll meet, I'll have to call you Mrs. Russell." Pat went upstairs and cried. To think of Winnie being Mrs. Russell. It sounded so terribly changed and different and far away. Her Winnie. Tears didn't stop the days from flying by. The wedding was to be in the church. Pat wanted Winnie to be married at home under the copper beech on the lawn. Mother couldn't go to the church, but Frank wanted the church. The Russells were Anglicans and had always been married in church. Frank got his way, of course, as Pat scornfully remarked to the heir. Pat and Judy were up to their eyes in baking, and favorite recipes were hunted up. Recipes that had not been used for years because they took so many eggs. The traditional Silverbush bride cake alone required 3 dozen. The Bay Shore aunts and the Swallowfield aunts sent over baskets of delicious confections. Aunt Barbara's basket was full of different kinds of cookies, orange cookies and date cookies and vanilla crisps and walnut bars, and the good man above knew how many more. It won't be much like Lord and a Binny's wedding table, exulted Judy. Sure, and poor Mrs. Binny thought if she did be cutting her cookies in a dozen different shapes, it would give them a different flavour. Now, Patsy darlin', just you be keepin' an eye on them chickens while I do be getting me yard posts whitewashed. At first dawn, Bold and Bad was shouting all over Silverbush that he had found a mouse, and Judy's footsteps sounded on the kitchen stairs. The morning hush was already broken by the stir of last-minute preparations. It had rained in the night, but now it was a fine and a new, lovely world with its face washed and blinking its innocent eyes at the sun. Sure, and the day was ordered, said Judy as she raked the lawn where robins were pulling out long, fat worms. Pat couldn't eat a mouthful of breakfast. It was a shock to see Winnie eating so heartily. Pat wasn't sure that if she were going to be married she couldn't eat for a week beforehand. Of course, she wouldn't want Winnie to be like that silly Lena Taylor who, it was said, cried for a month before she was married. But when you were going away from Silverbush that day, how could you have an appetite? The forenoon was like a whirlwind. The table had to be set. Oh, why did families have to be broken up like this? Among salads, jellies, and cakes, Pat moved as to the manner born. This time tomorrow Winnie would belong to another family. Everybody's place was settled. Pat had a knack of dovetailing people rather cleverly. Only herself and Siddy and Cuddles left at Silverbush. The rooms bloomed under her hands. The little alcove Uncle Tom called Cuddle Corner was a nest of round golden pillows like small suns. It was dreadful to find pleasure in these things when Winnie was going away. Flowers must be cut. As a rule, Pat didn't like to cut the flowers. She always felt such a vivid crimson delight in their splendid blossoms. A feeling that made the thought of cutting them hurt her. But now she slashed at them savagely. The table looked beautiful. It would be such a shame to spoil it, turn it into an after-dinner mess. But, as Judy said, that was life. Anyhow, Silverbush looks perfectly lovely, thought Pat in a momentary rapture. In a way it was all like an echo of Aunt Hazel's long-ago wedding day, the same confusion when everybody was dressing. Gentleman Tom was the only calm creature in the house. Judy was distracted because Boldenbad had been seen dashing through the hall with a very large, very dead mouse, and the good man above only knew what he had done with it. That vain Cuddles, who had been trying all the mirrors in the house to see which was the most becoming, was in trouble over the hang of her flowered chiffon dress. It had been a bitter pill to Cuddles that she was too old to be Winnie's flower girl. Aunt Hazel's 6-year-old Emmy was cast for that part, and Cuddles was secretly determined to look prettier than she did. "What does my nose look like, Pat? Do you think it is too big?" Cuddles's nose had always worried her. How would it turn out? "If it is, I don't see how you can remedy it," laughed Pat. "Never mind your nose, Cuddles darling. You look very sweet." "Can I put a dab of powder on it, Pat? Please, I'm 11. "That would only draw attention to it," warned Pat. Cuddles saw this. She cast a satisfied look at herself in the glass. "I have decided," she remarked in a matter-of-fact tone, "that I will get married when I am 20 and have 3 children. Pat, do I have to kiss Frank?" "I'm not going to," said Pat savagely. Judy, who was set on witnessing the nuptials, as she expressed it, had again laid aside her drugget dress and her Irish brogue. Out came the dress-up dress, and the English pronunciation as good as ever. Only the former was a bit tight. Pat had a terrible time getting Judy hooked into it. "Sure, and I had a waist when this was made," mourned Judy. "Do you be thinking it's a trifle old-fashioned like, Pat?" Pat got some lace and did wonders with it. Judy felt real chic. Mother was dressed, sitting in state in the big parlor with her gray hair and her soft blue eyes. Pat realized with a swift pang that Mother had got very gray in the year, but she looked like a picture in her pretty dress of silver gray and rose, with her necklace Dad had given her when she came out of the hospital, an amber string like drops of golden dew. Father was not going to the church after all. At the last moment he had decided that he simply could not leave Mother alone. Uncle Tom must give the bride away. Winnie was not very well pleased over this. That fierce, immense black beard of his was so old-fashioned. But Winnie was too happy to mind anything much. In her bride array she was an exquisite, shimmering young thing, with face and eyes that were love and rapture incarnate. Pat's throat swelled as she looked at her. Frank Russell suddenly became the man who could make Winnie look like this. She forgave him the offense of becoming her brother-in-law. The kitchen clock was 10 to. The parlor clock was 5 past. The dining-room clock was striking the hour, which meant that it was 1/4 past and time to go. Part 2. Sitting in the crowded church, with its decorations of tawny tiger lilies and lemon-hued gladioli. The C.G.I.T. girls had done it for Winnie, Pat thought busily to keep herself from crying. Winnie had warned her solemnly, "Pat, don't you dare cry when I'm getting married." She had been so near crying at Aunt Hazel's wedding long ago, but this was tenfold worse. It was odd to see the groom so pale. He was always so pink and chubby. But he looked well. She was glad he was nice-looking. A Silverbush had to have in-laws. It should have handsome ones. Uncle Tom's magnificent beard looked purple in the light that fell on it through the stained-glass window, like some old Assyrian king's. Winnie had said, "I do." How solemn! Just a word uttered or unuttered, and a whole life was changed, perhaps even the course of history. If Napoleon's mother had said "no" in place of "yes," why, it was over, it was over. Winnie was Mrs. Frank Russell. The bridal party was going into the vestry. Uncle Brian's Norma was singing the bridal anthem. Pat recalled that long-ago day when she had slapped Norma's face. What was that dreadful old cousin Sam Gardner whispering to her over the top of the pew? "I wonder how many husbands and wives in this church would like a change." How many indeed? Perhaps old Malcolm Madison, who was said to have laughed only 3 times in his life. Perhaps Gerald Black, whose wife had such a passion for swatting flies that she had bent forward in church one day and swatted one on Jackson Russell's bald head. Or Mrs. Henry Green, whose husband, Pat reflected wildly, looked like his own tombstone. She wondered if the story Judy told of him was true, that he had been whipped in school one day because the master caught him writing a love letter on his slate to Laura Perry, who was half gypsy. It couldn't be, not with that Scotch Presbyterian elder mouth. Old Uncle Tom Gardner was improving the weight by snatching a nap. Wasn't there a story about his wooden leg catching fire one day when he dozed by the fire? There was Mrs. James Morgan, who had never forgiven her daughter for marrying Carl Porter, and that had never entered her house. How could families act like that? Mrs. Albert Cody, Sarah Malone that was. Judy had a story about her. Oh, she had one of them easy-going fellers, went around with her for years and years and never got no forrager. Sarah went away for a visit to her aunt in Halifax and ripped back great yarns of her beaux and fine times. That scared him, and he writ for her to come home and be married. Sure, and there hadn't been a word of truth in what Sarah had told him. Her aunt was that sick and cranky she never went out of the house. Sarah Cody was a Sunday school teacher and looked very meek and devout beside her easy-going Abner. Very likely Judy had made it all up. What was horrid, Mrs. Stephen Russell whispering? Made the mistake of choosing a prettier bridesmaid than herself. It wasn't true. It wasn't. Allie Russell wasn't half as pretty as Winnie. Old Grant Madison, who had told Dad once that he had read too many dreadful things in old histories ever to believe in God. How dreadful not to believe in God. How could one live? Mrs. Scott Gardner had ironed out her wrinkles in some way. Beauty tricks, said Judy contemptuously. Why in the world didn't Winnie come back? But there was no Winnie now, only a mysterious stranger known as Mrs. Frank Russell. What was darling Cuddles thinking of as she gazed dreamily up at the tinted windows, nimbused in its gold and blue? She was really a delightful little thing. Pat recalled in amazement that she hadn't wanted Cuddles to be born. Part 3. Home again. Handshakings and congratulations and kisses. Pat even kissed Frank, but she hugged Winnie fiercely. Here's a whole heart full of good wishes for you, dear one, she whispered. Then she must fly for her ruffled organdy apron. The chilled cocktails must be got out of the ice house, the cream chicken put in the patties, the wedding gifts placed with just the right emphasis. Children ran around the grounds like small roses. The house was full. Every Gardner and half Gardner, every Selby, every Russell was there. This looks like the day of judgment, said old cousin Ralph Russell. He caught Pat by the arm as she flew by. Long Alex, girl, I hear you've got to be a beauty, hey? Let me look at you. No, not a beauty, and you've no great brains, they tell me, but you've got a way with you. You'll get a man. How people did harp on getting married. It was disgusting. Even oldish Ellery Madison, who still congratulated himself on escaping traps, called Pat Ducky and told her he'd take her if she liked. If you wait till we're both grown up, I might think of it, retorted Pat. Oh, but that's the way to talk to them, Judy told her as they lighted the candles. 'Twas myself that shut him up quick when he says to me, says he, it's time you were married, Judy. How the men do be hating a woman that's dared to do without them, says I. Sure, and I've been snubbing the creatures right and left. They've no more sense than to be cluttering up me kitchen and ruining the rugs. Old Jerry Russell says to me, says he, Miss Plum, do ye be thinking God is God or just a great first cause? And Mark Russell says, with a face as grave as a judge's, what is your opinion of the government bringing on an election this fall, Miss Plum? Sure, and I didn't know they was pulling my leg. I says to them, says I, you haven't the sense you was born with, says I. If you don't know, a wedding is no place to be talking of God or politics, and I'll thank you to stop Miss Plum and me, says I. I'm not finished them. Sure, and wasn't the ceremony grand, Patsy dear? Jake Russell says to me, she's the prettiest bride you've ever had at Silverbush. And I says to him, says I, for once in your life, you've said a mouthful. But that platinum ring now, do you be thinking it's real legal? I'm thinking Winnie'd fail a bit safer with an old-fashioned gold one. Judy, how can I bear to see Winnie go away? You must send her away with a smile, Patsy Dadlin. Whatever comes after, send her away with a smile.